Bienvenue. My name is Nate Higgins. I am the director of the United States nonprofit Energy in Our Future. I am also the host of the podcast, The Great Simplification. Yesterday, upon the invitation of my colleague in Canada, Kira Cooper, I gave a presentation to the Environmental Studies Association of Canada to the Academic Congress of Canada 2024, which next week will be viewed by some 10 to 15,000 professors and affiliates of universities. This was Kira was gracious in allowing me to speak as long as I wanted to. So of all the presentations I've done, this is the most comprehensive, most up-to-date. I forgot a few things. I'm sure I'm missing some things. The world is changing. I'm still learning. But if you're looking for one-stop shop, it's about an hour and 45-minute talk. There's a brief intro by Kira, followed by a part one, the drivers and constraints of our situation, the implications and scenarios, followed by a multiple scale portfolio of potential responses by us. It is my hope that many professors around the world start to integrate this system science of our human predicament instead of continuing to work in silos. We need the silos, but as part of a larger collective of information and cross-disciplinary sharing. I hope you learn from this presentation and share it. It will take a village. Here's Kira. A bientôt.
Greetings et bienvenue au Congrès 2024. Au nom de l'Association canadienne d'études environnementales et de nos partenaires, j'ai le grand honneur de vous présenter Dr. Nate Higgins. Nate est le directeur de l'Institute for the Study of Energy and Our Future et hôte du podcast The Great Simplification. Welcome. My name is Kira Cooper and I'm the co-president of the Environmental Studies Association of Canada. I wish to acknowledge that today I'm speaking to you from the traditional territory of the Haudenosaunee, Anishinaabe, and Neutral peoples. I would also like to recognize the immense natural resources, energy, and human capital that make it possible for us to be here on this call. On behalf of ESAC and our partners, I am honored to welcome Dr. Nate Higgins as our 2024 Congress keynote speaker. Nate is the co-founder and director of the Institute for the Study of Energy and Our Future and host of the Great Simplification podcast. He is a highly respected and widely trusted thought leader and communicator extraordinaire at the nexus of energy, environment, and finance. I am thrilled to have Nate join us as we discuss what sustaining shared futures means in these critical times. Without further ado, bienvenue and welcome, Nate.
Merci beaucoup, Kira. Thank you for the nice introduction. This will be the longest presentation I've ever given in my life. This is a culmination of 20 years of research on multiple disciplines. I know most of you are scientists and academics and probably haven't heard some of this. Some of this can be a little bit hard-hitting. There will be references on every page of my slides. You can watch the video later and research things. And Kira, I'll offer now, since we'll be on a tight timeline, I know we'll have time for a few questions, but if you wanted to reconvene another time for your colleagues in Canada to have a conversation and questions, I'd be happy to do that. So I'm going to speak fast. There's a lot of slides. We are part of a systems story. If you are a member of our species, which if you're watching this, you are, in the 300,000 years we've been a species, there's about an 8 to 10% chance that if you're human, you're alive right now. And we've arrived at a species level conversation, which is what I'm going to discuss today. I'm going to have 5 sections, a brief introduction. I'm going to describe the human ecosystem, the superorganism, implications and scenarios for the future. And then I've got quite a long what to do section. This isn't a prescriptive talk, but I can give ideas for the direction for the world, for Canada, for civil society, for the academy, and for you as individual humans. Okay, brief introduction. So those of you watching this, since this is a scientist plenary, you have different priorities. You also want to contribute to better futures for humanity. and you want to live a good life. I couldn't find a transparent image of a toque here. I'm going to focus on your research hat a little bit and make you think about what we need to be researching and the role of the academy in the future. And I'll come back to that at the conclusion. We hear a lot of stories in the news about what's going right and what's going wrong with the world, and I won't spend bandwidth here. But in order to diagnose the patient and figure out what to do, we first have to understand actually what's wrong and the drivers and the constraints of what we face, and that's what this talk is going to be about. The two predominant cultural narratives, at least in North America, are a Green New Deal. We migrate our energy systems to 100% renewables, work towards net zero emissions, and everything will be fine. There's also business as usual. There's nothing wrong with our past model. There's no shortages of anything. We need to deregulate and reduce taxes. This story is going to tell a wider and deeper history and explanation of our human predicament. From a siloed perspective, there's lots of important aspects to a more sustainable future. Renewable energy, there's a lot of experts on that. But if we take an aerial view, we can see that we have islands of expertise in our world that rarely talk to each other. And that ends up meaning that we have lots of concurrent, urgent and eloquent and erudite conversations that lack the aerial view that look at how things are connected. We have islands of expertise in our cultural conversations separated by oceans of incoherence. Okay, so how do we make sense of things and put them together? The human ecosystem. I'm going to go over this in several slides. We take energy, invent things, combine it with materials, develop products, represent these in our economic system by dollars, Canadian or US or others. And we do this all to generate the same emotional states of our ancestors, and the whole thing creates pollution. I'm going to first talk about the biophysical side of this. So energy is vital in nature. Nothing in nature moves without energy, and energy is also vital in human systems. Every single good or service in our global economic system that results in economic growth requires energy to invent, to mine, to create, to manufacture, to package, to deliver, to maintain, to repair, to run, to dispose of. There is not a single thing that contributes to GDP that doesn't require energy. I don't know about Canada, but in the United States, the average household has over 60 devices plugged in all the time, even if they're not running. And we take this for granted. We don't see the sea of energy that we are swimming in. This is a picture of me on my farm here in Wisconsin. That's a picture of my horse, who does the work of about one horse, which is 10 times more work than I can do. That's my utility vehicle with a little bit of gasoline, can do the work of 45 horses. And that's my truck with some diesel fuel, can do the work of 300 horses. The next time you're taking a flight to Toronto or Vancouver, imagine 100,000 horses invisibly pulling that jet across the sky. This is the power and the benefit that we get from this ancient carbon, which is oil. 1 barrel of oil has 5.7 million British thermal units worth of energy, which equates to around 1,700 kilowatt hours worth of work potential, compared to about 0.6 kilowatt hours in human daily work output. And after you do the math, that's around 4.5 years of physical human labor is in every barrel of oil. We use in the global economy about 100 million barrel of oil equivalents of coal, oil, and natural gas every year, which means we effectively have armies of fossil helpers to the tune of 400 or 500 billion human equivalents, compared to around 4 to 5 billion actual human workers. So what this has done is underpin the story of industrialization, where humans have replaced things we used to do manually or with draft horses by adding machines. And those machines and various technologies are all powered by energy, mostly fossil energy. And what this has done is raised our profits and our incomes and the size of the human enterprise. Here's an example of something in Wisconsin. We still are the dairy state. We have cows. The benefits that we get massively increase our profits and our wages. A person milking a cow spends around 30 minutes manually and makes around $5 an hour. If you add an automated system, you're adding 180 times more energy with the technology, but you're boosting the profits or the wages by almost 4 times to $20 per hour. Then you can even take it further and add a fully automated milking machine, which is 400 times more energy than an individual human. And that boosts the profit to around $25 an hour. What's really important, and one of the key takeaways from this presentation, is as energy prices increase, very energy heavy processes like aircraft or aluminum smelting, many mining things, not only become less profitable, but become unprofitable. The left panel here, the blue, orange, and gray, are what happens to the hand milking if prices increase? Nothing. The middle example shows if prices go from 5 cents in blue to 10 cents in orange to 15 cents a kilowatt hour in gray, there's a reduction in the profits. But as you'll see in the right panel here, and a doubling of energy prices from 5 cents to 10 cents, there's a massive drop in the heavy industry processes. And if we triple, we're now operating at a loss. And this was started to see last year because of the Ukraine war in Europe as natural gas prices spiked. Our economies are incredibly sensitive to increases in the main input to our current global enterprise, which is energy. So because of this industrialization, we have higher wages, higher profits, lower price stuff, and economic growth for more people. We actually do have more people. In the last few hundred years, we've gone from 1 billion people to 8 billion people alive today. But even more dramatic is the goods and services available per person. The average human today is 14 times materially wealthier than the average person 200 years ago. And the average person in the United States is 50 times as wealthy as the average human was 200 years ago. This doesn't account for inequalities and such. This is just geometric, arithmetic average. If you combine these two stats, the human economy measured by the number of people times the average goods and service consumption of those people is 1,000 times bigger than it was in the year 1500. But in our economics schools, our business schools at McGill University, we don't teach that energy is important. We teach that energy is its cost share of an input to a process. So $1,000 worth of oil is equal to our economy as $1,000 worth of pencils or bike helmets or water bottles or cupcakes. So in effect, our culture has become energy blind. This is a circular economy graph that's shown in beginnings Econ 101 classes that show that people demand things, corporations and the market produce the things, and there's this virtuous cycle, and that's how the economy goes forward. This cycle neglects the source of the majority of the inputs, which is the non-renewable energy and materials, and it neglects the sink, which is the carbon and other waste capacities of our planet. So our current economic system conflates the dollar value of energy with the work value, and we largely don't include the cost of pollution at all. We are energy blind. And if you look at what we are doing, we are drawing down ancient carbon millions of times faster than it was geologically sequestered and trickle charged by the sun of ancient phytoplankton and algae and diatoms. So we are alive during what one day may be referred to as the carbon pulse. And we have 300,000 year history as a species, and it might look like this. Zooming in, on a 20,000 year horizon, the carbon pulse might look like this, of all the coal, oil, and natural gas stacked on top of each other. On a 1,000 year period, it might look like this. And we are near the top of this carbon pulse. We're somewhere between the yellow star and the red star. Because energy is so important and vital from an economic perspective, we hope we're near the yellow star, because that means we have more decades ahead of this cheap fossil armies to support our technology and consumption. From a biosphere climate, which I'm going to talk about a little later, standpoint, we hope we're at the red star, because we've been emitting this warming effect, a thermal blanket from adding this ancient carbon so fast to the atmosphere that we don't want to continue to do that. But this carbon that we've taken for granted is finite. We take out the best first, then we get complicated tools to get more, but it is finite and depleting quite rapidly. The graph on the left shows a story of humans overcoming energy depletion with technology. The United States peaked in oil production in 1970, declined for 40 years, and then we discovered how to frack, and technology overcame depletion. Well, a different story is using the exact same data and charts, but broken out by geological province. The green shows the lower 48 states, the conventional oil. The orange shows Alaska, which is separated from the United States by Canada. It's not even a contiguous part of our country. The blue is offshore oil. It's not on the land. It's underneath the Gulf of Mexico. And this red is what has been fracked, the light tight oil. The light tight oil depletes at 80% in the first 18 months, and you have to continue to drill to find more. And there's nothing left after the tight oil. This is the source rock for where all the other oil originated. And what ends up happening is I'll go through this really quickly. The gray here shows the decline rate of all the oil wells drilled in the United States before 2014. The orange shows the decline rate, and it's a little bit steeper for 2014, all the way up to 2019 in the red. And you can see every year we add more and more wells, and the United States has drilled more wells than the rest of the world combined. And the decline rate becomes steeper. So we are having to run faster and faster in place just to stay in place. So what ends up happening is technology, in the case of shale oil, acts as a larger straw. Largely the same amount of original oil is there, but we're just getting it out faster and becoming that much closer to the slurping sound, which we hear at the end of the milkshake. Yes, new technology does access some resources that we wouldn't have been able to, but largely it just takes things out faster than we would have got without technology. What about so-called renewable energy? So one of the important concepts of energy blindness is the fact that all energy is not fungible, it's not equal, it's not interchangeable. So here are a few points on renewable energy. First of all, renewable energy isn't. It's a meme. Renewable energy is rebuildable. Oak tree is renewable. A chicken is renewable. As long as we find an acorn or a male and female chicken to make an egg, they are renewable. Wind turbines, solar panels, etc., are complicated machinery with polysilicon and a global supply chain. They are no more renewable than a pickup truck. The sun and the wind are renewable, but the devices we use to make them are not. Another point is renewable energy produces electricity, but only 20% of global energy use at the present moment is electric. There are lots of things that, because of the energy density, don't run on electricity. They could in the future, but only at a much higher cost. And I showed you earlier the impact of profits and viability from a higher cost. There is also all of our plans for a techno utopia future kind of wave away the fact that we've been growing our energy every single year with the exception of recessions for the last 100 years. This at some point in the near future will change. And what will renewable energy and other technology do on the downslope of the carbon pulse once these 500 billion fossil workers start to retire? Also, higher full system cost means lower economic benefits, as I said before. There's a difference between a technology being viable and being affordable and scalable. Also, there are around 6,000 other products that are generated from oil and natural gas. And, we have asphalt and plastic and medicines and tires and all kinds of medical devices, et cetera. These all come from oil. So if we stopped using oil, we would need to find alternatives for many of these 6,000 inputs that are byproducts of our current barrel of oil. So far, the energy transition has not been. It's been more of an energy addition. If you look at the last 200 years of human energy use, the green is biomass, the brown is coal, the black is oil, the dark blue is gas, nuclear, etc. Solar and wind end up being about 2.5% of final consumption. They are growing quite rapidly, but in an absolute, and they're growing faster than fossil fuels. But on an absolute basis, globally, fossil fuels are still growing. They've grown 55% in the last 15 years. So far, there has not been a green revolution, only a green addition. And by the way, we are now using more biomass, shown in green here, than we were in the year 1850, which was before we started using fossil fuels. Lastly, it is true that renewable energy is much more efficient than coal or oil in various processes. However, society doesn't maximize energy use or maximize efficiency. We maximize power, which is energy use per unit time that creates work. This is called the fourth law of thermodynamics, which is the maximum power principle, which is we operate in nature at intermediate states between efficiency and full resource use. And usually that's at an intermediate state. And the implications for this is that this is an average load at 3 different times during the year. This is what our societal demands require. And this is what we work during the day, and there's a spike, and then we go to sleep at night, but we still have a lot of baseline things that are going. But society cares about creating this graph. And the best thing for that is potential energy that is stored that we can burn at a flick of a switch and meet these demand curves. We can use solar and wind better than we are doing now, but it's going to look like a much different society. Okay, briefly on materials. Energy and GDP are 99% correlated globally. Materials and GDP are 100% correlated. So if you look at the red line here is global GDP. The purple line is the material footprint, which is a composite of energy and materials. And you can see they're incredibly tightly linked. We are growing renewable energy faster than we're growing fossil fuels, which is why the global CO2 continues to increase, but it increases at a lower rate than energy and GDP, but they're very tightly linked. The problem is as we decarbonize, we're going to have to rematerialize because renewable energy is very copper, metal, rare earth dependent. Another issue is much of these materials like cobalt and nickel and lithium and copper are found in countries that are in the global south. They are poorer material countries. They already have civil strife, and they're going to be experiencing higher wet bulb temperatures and chaos and uncertainty from a warming climate. This is a real problem for the scaling of the current net zero EV plans. This graph shows the blue lines are the production of the country of Chile of copper, and the red line are the consumption of energy. In the United States, we used to have 20% ore grade in the 19th century. That went down to 2% ore grade and now is 0.2%. So we have to get more and more rock and overburden to get the same amount of copper. The point here is that even in materials and in every aspect of society, everything we do will become more expensive if we can't reduce the energy consumption of various processes faster than energy prices grow. Okay, what about technology? How does technology fit into this? Well, every unit of GDP has three things in common: energy, materials, and information, or the technology. There are no exceptions. So there are two types of technology. The first type is ways to make energy use more efficient, or a new energy technology like a better solar panel. The other type of technology, type two, is creating devices that replace what humans used to do manually, or new inventions that our prior ancestors never had access to. The vast majority of technology in our world today is of this type 2, which ends up increasing the baseline for more energy requirement the following year. So this graph shows that humans get better at inventions and we get more efficient in our energy use over time, around 1.2% a year more efficient over the last 200 years. However, during that same time, this is another color chart showing the energy stack of various energies over the last 200 years. We continue to grow our total energy. In fact, energy efficiency has increased 36% in the last 35 years, but during that time, our energy consumption has increased 63%. This is called the rebound effect, or Jevons paradox, that as we make more profits because we got more efficient, we funnel those profits back into economic growth, which is a draw on energy. What about money? Money's what makes the world go round, right? Well, money is actually a claim on energy. When you spend your loonie at Tim Hortons, or any other thing in our daily lives, every time we spend something, it's a call on energy. Economic textbooks tell us that money is lent out from existing capital at banks. This is incorrect. The reality is that the vast majority of money is lent into existence. Banks don't lend money, they create it. And when they create it, the financial system is in balance. There's the same amount of assets and liabilities, but the biophysical world is not, because when 10 million Canadian dollars come into the system from a bank, the same amount of timber or moose or copper or dolphins or trees exist. So here's a conceptual showing from time from left to right, that we had sustainable flows of the biogeochemical use of nature, the soil, the sun, and the wind. And in around the 1700s, we hit a capacity on that. There's a different sort of curve, which is a Gaussian or normal curve, which is for finite resources. And we started to access things like oil and copper and coal. These were buried underground, but they're finite, and we started to add them to our economic system, but there will be a peak and a decline of these, like there will on the carbon pulse. Overlaid on all that is a monetary thing, which is a cultural creation by our species, that we create monetary markers for all this stuff. And if you put all these three things together, they create this little graphic. And with access to this ancient sunlight, which is indistinguishable from magic on human timescales, our economic system grew so fast and large that land no longer explained our wealth. And gradually, the economics profession parsed our explanations into capital and labor. And using the social construct of credit, which is largely run by central banks in the world right now, we pulled resource consumption forward in time. Now our world views our future and our culture through a financial lens. We have not only financialized the human experience, but also the explanation of it. Okay, that's the energy material tech part of the story. Now, what about the environment? What about the pollution that comes from our economic system? This could be its own 2-hour talk, but I'll just give the highlights right here. It's not just climate, but there are many aspects that the human system is affecting the natural world. This shows the last 400,000 years of CO2 in the atmosphere, shown in green, global temperatures, shown in the middle panel in red, and sea level rise, shown in the bottom in blue. We have already had 400 feet of sea level rise in the last 20,000 years, and we are in uncharted territories from any time before the Eemian. We are now going into a warmer period than at any time when humans lived on this planet. And I could argue that humans are changing climate today, but climate change actually caused humans. The red chart on the bottom is expanded here in the last 20,000 years. Around 15,000 years ago, the climate warmed and stabilized, unbelievably stable for the last 10,000 years, which is when we expanded around the world with agriculture and settlements and hierarchy and technology, et cetera. And now we're moving out of that stable band into the unknown. The only known is it's barring a nuclear holocaust, it's likely to be warmer to much warmer. So this carbon pulse that we are living through, that yet it's invisible to us, is really distinctly important because most of the prior mass and mini extinctions were correlated with carbon pulses. The blue spikes here show the percentage of the genus level extinctions on Earth over the last 300 million years. And the magenta bars are when there were large outgassings of volcanic provinces that were near-term pulses of carbon, and this ended up being disastrous for species on the planet. Unlike most mass extinctions linked to volcanic pulses, our pulse is not from volcanoes, but from Volkswagens and vacations and deforestation and other things. This is a monthly graph of the temperature anomaly from the pre-industrial baseline. You can see that many of the hottest divergences are this year, 2024. One could argue that this would be the coolest year of the rest of your lives. I'm not sure that's entirely valid because this is an El Nino year, but you can see that the heat is on. Part of the climate discussion that is not often discussed is the impact on oceans, and there are many, many ocean risks. There's ocean acidification. There is the erosion of coastlines, since the sea level is going to rise as the glacier and ice melts. There's overfishing. There is the loss of calcium carbonate in shells. There's the impact on food webs. Ocean oxygen content is already declined by 2% and 20% in the shallows. There are many, the AMOC, the Atlantic Meridional Overturning Circulation in the Atlantic Ocean, has slowed already 15%. And this is all because the oceans are absorbing 90% of the heat from the extra thermal warming from fossil fuels. Beyond climate itself, and climate is the key because it affects all the other things I'm talking about, we neglect our impact on the other 10 million species we share this planet with, what I refer to as the real stock market. Since I was born, we have lost almost 70% of the animal populations on this planet. And it's probably worse than that because that stat is 6 years old. We don't see that much in North America because we've only lost 25% here. But in Asia and Latin and South America, it's much more extreme. This chart shows on the left the estimated biomass of wild animals 100,000 years ago, relative to the orange of wild animals today, relative to the light pink, which is our cows, pigs, and sheep, and humans. So humans and our livestock now outweigh wild mammals at a ratio of 50 to 1. It's not only animals, insects are declining at 1 to 2% a year in biomass. This is trillions of tiny robots doing tasks humans couldn't do without them that we take for granted. Birds eat insects. Birds are also declining. These are Canadian statistics here showing the percentage decline of various types of birds. One thing that's increasingly in the media is the impact not only of plastics like plastic bottles and the fact that plastic now outweighs all animals on Earth and will eventually outweigh all the fish in the ocean, but microplastics. There's something called PFAS, which is a forever chemical. Scientists don't really understand the endocrine disrupting impacts. However, sperm count in humans and in other animals is declining at an accelerated pace globally. Sperm count is dropping at around 2.5% a year. Right now, one couple in 7 cannot have a baby because of lack of sperm motility. And that's shocking. But what's even more shocking is 20 years ago, it was 0 in 7. And there are some estimates by 2050 under current trends that we won't be able to have babies. Okay, that's a pretty rugged little summary I went through there. And it's as many times as I say it, I still get kind of a pit in my stomach as I'm sharing this with strangers online because many of you are aware of those things. But if you haven't heard those things before, it can feel like a punch to the gut. And I will just empathize with you that that is a normal, totally acceptable reaction. And if that is your reaction, I offer you a brief apology. But these are the times we're alive. This is why I'm sharing this stuff, because I think more people need to understand and engage with these issues. Okay, let's moving on to the core driver of this stuff, which is the human behavior, starting with our feelings. So we are related to every single other creature on Earth. We share a common universal ancestor. If you look on the tree of life, there's humans way down here in the corner. We're 99.9% related to all other humans, including Canadians. We're 98% related to other apes, bonobos, and chimpanzees, 90% related to cats, 85% genetically related to mice, 80% to cows, 60% to fruit flies, 60% to chickens, and we are 50% genetically related to mushrooms. We are kin with everything else on this blue-green earth, and we often forget that. We go through our life, like other biological organisms, trying to match the same emotional states of our successful ancestors. So bagging a gazelle on the Pleistocene savanna, today we make a stock trade or make a Bitcoin profit, and the same areas in our brain light up. Humans are intensely social and status conscious. This has to do with the concept of sexual selection in nature, which in the case of a peacock, this giant ornate tail has 3 fitness hits to the peacock. It is cost of all its minerals and calories going to this tail. It makes it more apparent and obvious to a predator. And if a predator chases it, it's harder to get away. All 3 of those were overcome by the preference from the female peacock for such a display. And are we that different than this? This picture here shows Tiger Woods, who's a billionaire, his yacht pulling into a marina where his ex-wife's boyfriend's yacht is 10 feet longer than his. So we constantly compare ourselves to others at various scales planet-wide. We also have neural circuitry that hijacks our ancestral reward system and tricks us into thinking that the things we're doing are actually good for us and good for our status and our respect in our tribe. For instance, some students maybe watching this presentation might play Overwatch or some video game, and their brains feel like they're bagging a gazelle for their tribe, but they're actually sitting in a couch in their mom's basement accessing a coal-fired server. The dopamine superhighway is really central to planetary overshoot and our consumption, because what ends up happening, shown in this graph, there's academic research reference on the bottom, that we get the signal, and the signal causes a behavior, and we do the work, and then we get the reward. We don't get the dopamine when the reward happens, but before. It's the anticipation of reward. But what ends up happening in our culture is energy has become so cheap and we have such a smorgasbord of consumption that our work and our behavior is disconnected from the reward because we get reward all over the place all the time without doing the work. So we end up in a situation, and this is a picture of my storage shed here, where the ghost of dopamine past ends up buying things constantly, and the wanting of things ends up being a more powerful driver of our behavior than the having of them. All of you go home this weekend and look in your garage, in your storage shed, etc. We got short-term dopamine hits for those purchases, but they weren't sustainable, and we had to buy more to feel the same way at some point in the future. So important point, our brains are flow-based, but our world, our economic system is stock-based, and we're driving down the stocks of non-renewable energy and resources millions of times faster than they were built up in order to get ephemeral dopamine. In effect, we're turning billions of barrels of ancient sunlight into microliters of neurotransmitters. We also have different belief systems, and the human brain can utter millions of times more sentences than can exist in biophysical reality. So the virtual world in our minds is really more powerful than our biophysical reality. And this is why science and the academy are hopefully can play a vital role in our path going forward, because science is a light in the dark and can distinguish fantasy from reality. It's the best tool that we have. We are incredibly in-group and out-group oriented. We quickly and strongly form groups, and we defend and support our group and tend to ostracize and root against others. Groups could be a few people, or they could be nation state size. Shown here is Canada beating the US in hockey. We are very social. We're ultra social. So our behaviors are plastic, but we copy other humans. And this is good news because cultural evolution happens at lightning speed versus biological evolution. Okay, so those are the primary drivers of the human ecosystem. How do those fit together? How does the whole system fit together into a narrative that explains our current reality? I'm sure you've seen starlings in nature. Starlings follow 3 simple rules. Do what your neighbor does, don't get too close, and fly towards the center. Those 3 simple rules result in this emergent behavior of these beautiful murmurations of birds in the sky that look like they're choreographed, but they're not. It's an emergent property. Humans do something similar. In our current world, importantly, this is not the way that it always was, and it's not the way that it has to be in the future. But we coordinate in our families, in our small businesses, in our corporations, even as entire nations, to acquire financial surplus, which is linked to energy. We spend the surplus and we pursue culturally accepted behaviors. The emergent property of that is this vast, interconnected, material and energy hungry system of human habitation and commerce across the planet. If you look at this, the brake lights and the headlights in this aerial view of a city are not biophysically too dissimilar than the veins and the arteries of a human body. And the hemoglobin that is being passed through these veins and arteries is gasoline and diesel fuel from oil. And we have a global transport system. This is the airline routes through the earth. So our culture keeps score of this system by gross domestic product. If you add up all the countries in the world, it's gross world product. Well, GWP, given the 99% correlation between energy and GDP, could rightly be named gross world burning, because energy and GDP are and will remain tightly linked. So my academic research has likened human culture to an energy dissipating structure, a mindless superorganism akin to a blind, hungry amoeba. So human society has a metabolism, and metabolism has a waste product in the form of CO2 and other things. So the global north has been trying to go to renewable energy, getting rid of coal, although we're still using natural gas. But the developing world, especially China and India, are growing as much energy as they can. So since the 2015 Paris Agreement, we actually have a global increase in coal use. China is building 6 times more new coal plants. India plans to double their coal production. They are aware of climate. India is going to be one of the most susceptible countries to climate. The reason they're doubling their coal is because it's the cheapest thing that they can do, and they need more air conditioning and fans. So, trying to mitigate climate change within our existing economic structure is like arguing with a forest fire. This is an uncomfortable conclusion, but it's one that I've come to believe. There is no one driving the bus of our economic system, not politicians, not billionaires, not the rich and powerful. The market is pulling us forward, and we have outsourced our wisdom and decision making to the financial markets. So this is kind of a metaphor from Lord of the Rings, the Tower of Sauron. And I've graphically shown here the history of humans and technology. Shown in the bottom is we left our hunter-gatherer ancestry and started to produce agriculture, which created agricultural surplus, which we could trade. We had hierarchy then. We had mayors and kings and artisans and warriors and accountants. And then a couple hundred years ago, we accessed the power in flammable fossils. And then we turbocharged this faster by creating fiat currency that were markers for real things, and we accelerated the whole thing. And now we're using artificial intelligence to make all of these processes even faster. And this whole thing is this Borg or this Eye of Sauron pulling this economic system forward. And it's my opinion, and there's ample evidence in the last few months to underpin this, is under our current economic aspirations and goals, which are, of course, fluid in our lifetimes, artificial intelligence is going to, much like shale fracking, act as a larger draw on the energy in the environment. And that doesn't focus only on how much energy the servers are. Today, a news story came out that said that just the data servers alone in the United States are going to use as much energy between now and 2030 as 150 million electric vehicles. That's not the point. The point is that AI is going to make energy extraction. It's going to make alternative energy. It's going to make all the processes in our world more efficient, potentially. And all of that is going to accelerate impact on the environment. Okay, we're getting nearer to the conclusions of this part one. Under the framing that I presented here, what is not likely to happen? Growing the economy and mitigating climate change and the sixth mass extinction. Growing the economy by replacing fossil fuels with renewables. We're actually adding. Culture en masse choosing to leave fossil carbon in the ground, and governments embracing limits to growth before limits to growth are well past. Under this framing, what is likely to happen? A growth in gross energy while net energy declines, massive money creation and financial market support by central banks and governments, wider and deeper poverty globally and more inequality. AI is going to accelerate the energy and environmental problems unless we shift our goals. A rightward shift in politics, because as things get scary and uncertain, people tend to get more conservative and want things to be the way they used to be in the past. This is happening rapidly in Europe. We're yet to see what's going to happen in North America. A reduction, paradoxically, in global environmental regulations. And under the superorganism framing, it's going to be pedal to the metal until we hit some sort of a crisis or hit a wall. Implications and scenarios of all this. So there are generally 4 scenarios that are discussable. One is a green growth future, that we use technology and create more productivity in the world, and we become so profitable and productive that we can use the excess to heal the environment. The second scenario is what I refer to as the Mordor economy, which is we are going to continue to grow, but more and more of our economic energy and materials will be directed to the energy and mining sector of the economy, meaning there will be less available for hospitals and universities and entertainment and travel and things like that, because our economy will, instead of using 5% of our energy to get the energy and materials, it'll be 10% and 15% and 18%, leaving less for discretionary society. I call this the Mordor economy, and I would say this is the default. We're also going to need more and more energy and money to mitigate environmental problems like droughts and floods and hurricanes and heat problems, etc. Let me explain the trajectory of the Mordor economy using this chart. The red line on the far left is when Reverend Thomas Malthus lived on the planet, and he said that the geometric production of humans would outstrip our arithmetic production of food. And he was wrong. He was wrong because he didn't know about fossil fuels that were underneath the ground. Fast forward to 1969, and Paul Ehrlich wrote a book called The Population Bomb, saying many similar things. And he was wrong, at least about that at that time, because he didn't know about debt, that we have increased our debt faster than we've increased our GDP in every single year since 1969. And he didn't know about globalization, that we could outsource the production of things to the least cost areas in the world. Fast forward to 2009, the next red line, and we had a great financial crisis. That was bailed out by the central banks taking over the role of monetary creation from the commercial banks. We had COVID in 2020, again, the bazooka of the Federal Reserve and other financial guarantees. And what will be the next can to kick? If we grow at 3% a year, that means the energy and materials, given the stats I said earlier, will double every 30 years. So if there is a 15-year-old watching this presentation, by the time she is 75, there will not only be a doubling, but a quadrupling in the energy and material use of the human economy. Is that possible? Is that desirable? What happens if that happens? What happens if it doesn't happen? These are some of the central questions of our time. So that is the Mordor economy. The third category, which is what I've named my podcast and my work, is called the Great Simplification, which is we will not continue to grow, but we manage a graceful descent. The average person in America uses 100 times more energy than our bodies need in terms of calories. If we went down to 70 or 60 or 50, it wouldn't necessarily be a bad thing. So the Great Simplification is at some point in coming decades, when we remove this ubiquitous credit with a shift to more costly energy and resources and a return to solar inputs and renewables, which are viable but more costly in a system-wide perspective, we will no longer be able to maintain our system of financial claims, and one of the next 3 recessions will be a depression. There is a musical chair element to our current system of claims, and I refer to this as a great simplification, shown here as one trajectory out for the next 30 years. Lastly, there would be the fourth quadrant would be the Mad Max scenario, which is that we decline and there is no stability and social contract holding things together. And I'm sure you've seen enough movies about that scenario. However, in our social discourse, the vast majority of people talk about this one scenario, and the other 3 scenarios are really not given that much discourse. I would argue that the true odds are more like the areas of these shapes shown here, and I'm advocating that we should consciously try towards a great simplification, which is a smaller, more local economy that still has the benefits of civilization, but different relationships with each other, with the natural world, and hopefully less pollution to the other species and ecosystems. Between here and there, however, we have some constraints that are now unavoidable. And I want to briefly talk about what I call the 4 horsemen of the 2020s. which I've recently changed to the Five Horsemen. The first one is a financial bend or break moment. We keep papering over our problems with more credit and central bank largesse. In the past 10 years, government debt has grown 60% to $83 trillion. Corporate debt, household debt have also grown. We are in a new era where every few months we're increasing the debt in the United States by $1 trillion. We're just adding that to, we're transmuting wealth into income. We have this natural endowment of resources, energy, and ecosystems, and we're creating new claims on that at an accelerating rate. So we create debt much more faster than GDP, but we're stretching this relationship to our underpinning reality, and there's going to be a snapback at some point because all these financial claims that we're creating will eventually have to be paid back in energy and materials and ecosystem services. The reason that you don't hear talks like this is there is no credible institution or government body in the world that is specifically planning for an end to growth because it's a very uncomfortable conversation to have. So in the meantime, we're papering over our problems with more and more credit while the energetic and material bases for our currencies deplete. So we don't think of it this way, but when we take on debt as a nation, as a company, or as a person, the debt must be paid back with energy. But as I said earlier, our energy, our high quality energy, is starting to flatline and will eventually start to decline. But at the same time, we're growing the red line, which is our monetary markers. Okay, second horseman of the next decade is geopolitics. This is June 7th. There are Russian warships headed to the Caribbean. Russia announced yesterday they're going to be selling weapons to countries that are antagonistic to the West. We are approaching this biophysical shift from a world that focused on money and technology to one that focuses on energy and ecology. And a lot of the energy in the world is in countries that aren't necessarily so friendly to us. Around 2/3 of the remaining oil is within 600 miles of Israel. Around half of the world's purchasable oil navigates the Strait of Hormuz, this 2-mile wide strait between Iran and Saudi Arabia every day. These are things that we take for granted. I would say unlikely, I don't know how unlikely it is, it's certainly possible, but we have between the United States and Russia about 12,000 nuclear warheads. And if there were to be an exchange or a strategic escalation, this graph shows the impact on climate. This is one way that the climate would actually cool, is if there were enough nuclear weapons sent into the atmosphere that the soot blocked out the sun. This would be the absolute worst Armageddon disaster scenario of all, because although the climate would ultimately be cooler, it would wipe out most of complex life in the process. This is a crappy thing to say to a bunch of Canadian scientists, but this is something that our society has shrugged under the carpet, and it is a very real risk in our world. People were really worried about it 50, 60 years ago, and now it's really not in part of our discourse. Also, we have to realize that we have a 6-continent supply chain, this globally interconnected economy that is just-in-time products. 80% of our pharmaceutical ingredients are made in China and India. For the United States, which has 4% of the world's population and 50% of the world's medical prescriptions. We have many, many just-in-time supply chains that some complicated part is made in South Korea and ends up in Toronto 3 days later, that without that part, we couldn't do some industrial process. So this is something that we take for granted. Also, the social contract. I don't know how things are in Canada, but things are really starting to get a little uncomfortable in the United States. There is an enormous partisan divide in the media in the United States. Very few people read the same news sources. We have different facts. Artificial intelligence is making it difficult to believe what is true or what is not, which is another reason that the academy is vital for coming decades, because trust in scientists is declining, but it's still among the highest trust that people have is in science. The fifth horseman, which if you live in British Columbia and other places you're already aware of, is the ongoing impacts of climate change on our ecosystem. There are droughts, there are floods, there are fires, there are wet bulb temperatures where people can't survive. The other day in Delhi, India, it was 129 degrees in early June. Climate is warming right now, and this is going to be a story for the rest of our lives. I promise you that I'm going to leave you with some actionable ideas and directions, but I do think it's important to understand the landscape of what we face. Here are some summary points of the first part of this presentation. Long-term, growth was not the norm. We are living through a unique exponential period of economic growth for our species. There were several periods in the last 2,000 years that lasted for hundreds of years with flat to declining growth. All of our economic rules and explanations of how the world works were created in this little red bubble here. And what does that portend for the future? Cheap, abundant fossil energy underpins our societies and our society's expectations. This is a stock that we have culturally treated as a flow. It is principal we're drawing down, not interest. We have conflated the proximate drivers of progress and growth with the ultimate drivers. Most people think that politics, technology, and money are what drive our economic systems, but they are sitting on top of a large flux of around 500 million fossil worker equivalents and on the living, breathing biosphere of which we're all dependent. We don't pay for the ecosystem services of Mother Earth. As long as growing GDP is our global goal, better technology is going to tend to grow and not shrink CO2 emissions and impact because of the rebound effect and Jevons paradox. Technology could be really important for future decades, but it's going to have to be stuff that is appropriate for our economies, and we're going to have to change our economic system if this is no longer going to be the case. In other words, the energy transition, which is oft lauded in the press, is not really about energy. It's ultimately about how we relate to each other, how we relate to the natural world, our levels of consumption, our change in consciousness, and all that. And yes, energy will also play a role, but it's not the driver. Barring a new boost in productivity, which is possible, it's kind of on the come, I don't know, from artificial intelligence, growth is likely soon over. And when that happens, there is a musical chair situation. And the first challenge is going to be responding to a financial recalibration. At that moment, we should aim for bending, which is holding the system together and landing at a lower material throughput scale as opposed to breaking. Breaking would be bad. Rather than choose austerity, governments and central banks will continue to print and monetize debt, eventually leading to currency debasement and possibly currency reform. We do not actually face a resource shortage, but rather a longage of expectations. As I said earlier, the average American uses 100 times more energy than our bodies need. Most of the best things in life are free after basic needs are met. Here's me reading a story to my dog at bedtime with two of my college friends, talking about birds and doing bird songs with a bunch of kindergartners in India and some friends I met. I just got back from India a couple months ago. Another point, we do need renewables and technology, but the way they're touted now, renewables are the right answer to the wrong question. The question is, how do we land the plane this century with viable technology that supports ecosystems and a thriving human population? Right now, we're just using renewables as kind of an appendage to the global superorganism, not as a construction of a new system. There is a biophysical phase shift occurring in global politics, alliances, and agreements. This means there's a shift between, as I said earlier, money and technology narratives to energy and material narratives. And that is going to change the power structure and the international agreements and the trade and the economic growth in the future. Climate change is not the problem, but climate change is one of many symptoms of a much larger dynamic dysfunction, which is the ecological concept of overshoot, which is a species, in this case ours, has overshot the carrying capacity of the planet given our current population and consumption levels. This is a scene from the movie Don't Look Up, which was so spot on that I included it in this presentation. This presentation that I'm telling you all today cannot be voiced aloud in politics and media because it's too strange, it's too complex, it's too abstract, it's too threatening. There are no easy answers. And if senior people verbally share that they agree with this, what are the solutions? It becomes politically dicey and uncomfortable. That doesn't mean we shouldn't discuss it. We have to discuss it behind the scenes to create blueprints, break glass in case of emergency, and other paths forward. Last point here is our current resource tech situation can power a great culture and a meaningful civilization, just not this one, not at this size and scale. The current system uses 19 terawatts of power continuously, which is 190 billion light bulbs turned on 24/7. That is not sustainable. What do we do to get out of this? I think the only way out is through, and here are some thoughts at various scales of what we should do. I no longer talk about solutions. I prefer to talk about responses, and there are a million possible responses. Each of you sitting in the audience or sitting at your office or at your home, just briefly think about, what do you think the solution is? What do you think some of the responses should be to the human predicament that I've just laid out the choreography of? And by the way, I may have some pieces of it wrong, and I learn stuff every day, and I may be missing some important things. But I think if you squint and look at how the pieces fit together, I think what I've described will roughly hold its shape in the coming decades. So if you think about what would be the responses to what I just described, they are different to different people based on what they care about, where they live, what their value system is. There are a list of solutions for rich or well-off people or rich or well-off countries. There is a list of solutions for poorer countries and people. There is a list of responses and solutions for other species and other ecosystems. And there's a list of unborn humans, of future generations, and unborn of other species of the 10 million currently species we share the planet with. So there's not one size fit all responses. So keeping that in mind, most people care about themselves. The only thing we might care about more than ourselves is our children. But beyond that, our family, our community, our region, our nation, our world, other species, other generations get exponentially less care in our economic decisions. This is also something that we have to recognize when we talk about responses. So in effect, we are somewhere between the yellow star and the red star, and all of our cultural stories are about the green arrow continuing forward in time. So here is the way that I think about this. There are three distinct timelines for interventions. The red is the time now, before the crises arrive, that we have to prepare as best as we can as individuals, as universities, as communities, as nations, given the synthesis I've laid out. The yellow is the time where this financial recalibration happens. That could be as soon as 3 months or 15 years. I don't know. But that is when there's going to be a currency, bond, financial reckoning. And I think we have to focus in that moment and now in preparing for that moment to bend and not break. And then where do we land this plane metaphorically? What are the sustainable practices that Canadians and humans around the earth should start practicing for the longer term because that's what's going to be more sustainable. So there are people that should be working on all three of these timelines, and everyone's preference is different. But it's not just let's do one thing. There are three timelines, and not only are there different timelines, but there are different scales. And I'm going to briefly give a list here of some categories of response at the global level, the civil society community level, for the academy and universities, and for individual humans. So culturally, we have a road closed sign ahead of us, and many of us are starting to see that in the distance, that what we're doing is unsustainable. So, what is the goal of a talk like this? What is the goal of my podcast and my work? It's to normalize the conversations around these topics so we get more people involved in discussing them, being pro social, and being creative and rolling up their sleeves and getting engaged. What we're trying to do now is change the initial conditions of the future moments when these events start to ensue. So, what we're doing is kind of creating a time capsule to imagine what are the things we're going to need to be doing in coming decades. So, here's some categories to consider. At the global level, first of all, as I mentioned earlier, we are moving from a unipolar world to a multipolar world. And what are the governance structures and ways of doing things that will allow a peaceful navigation through that period? Another is our incentives. We look at the prices of things and then we make economic decisions. But everything that our culture aspires to is linked to GDP, monetary surplus, and growth. And if we change our incentives to include nature and human health and well-being and the ecosystem health of the world, that's going to mean different incentives, different prices, and different signals. So one thing that I don't know how viable it is to do right now, but we could add a tax to anything that is an input to our economic system that is non-renewable in nature. Not only carbon, but copper or fossil water aquifers or lithium or anything like that. If we add a tax to these things, what will happen is our devices will be much more expensive, but we will give signals to consumers to conserve things that are mostly non-renewable, and we will give signals to inventors and innovators about the real cost of depleting things, and they will use these scarcer resources more sparingly. So we will conserve and innovate at a better level. The main input to renewables is human labor. So if we added a tax and we taxed everything that was non-renewable, we would remove all taxes on individuals and corporations. We would have to have some sort of a regressive help for that would be a regressive tax scheme, but it would favor renewable build out and other things that weren't dependent on non-renewable inputs. In addition to changing the incentives, we need to change the aspirations. So this graph is from Canadian Václav Smil, who is in Winnipeg, showing that the energy supply use per capita gives us a massive increase in well-being and a human development index from low levels. But once we're at around 100 gigajoules per capita, any additional increase in energy consumption per capita doesn't give us that much. The United States uses almost 3 times as much energy per capita as Italy or Japan. Yet we're about the same on the Human Development Index, and we're actually declining in life expectation and other diseases of despair in my nation. So to move beyond GDP, again, most of the best things in life are free after basic needs are met. If I asked you while watching this presentation, what are your 5 best memories of your life? Most of you would not say that they required a lot of money or energy, but it would be playing cards at a slumber party with your friends, or fishing on Lake of the Woods with your family, or time in nature in the beautiful forests in Canada, or with your dogs, or things that don't require a lot of energy and money. And our society, our individuals recognize this, but our society, because we've outsourced things to the market, do not. We need an icon to represent the future. Of the 3,000 some emojis on our phone, there is no icon to represent the future. My colleague DJ White and I created this T with an arrow just as a suggestion, but we need something to represent the future. Another category is advanced policy. The reason that it's called advance and not policy is the things that we're going to need to do as a governing body in Canada and the US and the world can't be happening at the margin because they're too politically or socially difficult now. So we need to have something like a council of elders that is building break glass plans or blueprints, or in case of emergency, do this ahead of time so we know what to do when some of these events come to pass. Like the bender break moment I talked about, the rubber band snapping back in the financial system. From the perspective of the carbon pulse, what governance structures best fit after the red star? I don't know the answer to that. But democracy and communism and things like that were designed for small groups of people, not necessarily 8 billion people. I mean, this is a conversation for a political scientist to integrate the biophysical story that I'm telling here. We need different technology. Technology is vital, but the technology that we have now is just feeding the hungry ghost of the economic superorganism. As I said earlier, solar panels can power a wonderful civilization, just not this one. So, from the perspective of the carbon pulse, what are the top 4 human inventions of all time? According to Nate, the bicycle is the most energy efficient invention ever made. To get a person from point A to point B using the least amount of energy is a bicycle. The story, or playing Dungeons and Dragons, or anything that is in the virtual world of our mind, sitting with other humans, the unexpected reward and novelty of listening to other people is free. And it's an amazing invention. Number 2 is the dog, which really isn't an invention. It's a co-evolution. This is my golden retriever, Quinn. They give us unlimited oxytocin, serotonin, and some dopamine. And what a wonderful thing. By the way, I could not do this work without having a golden retriever around because it's pretty intense. And the number 1 invention could be music, because we can be transformed, again, with not a lot of energy and materials, into a different mental state and emotional state and physical state from music. So Homo sapiens is wise man. So far, we've been much more clever than wise. What sort of technology will be most suited for the downslope of the carbon pulse? I think something that I would refer to as Goldilocks tech, which is not some fancy drone gadget and not going back to the Stone Age, but something in between that's scalable and affordable and sensible. For instance, instead of lithium mining in Bolivia, we can make batteries from sodium, which is from salt. It's a simpler material. It's not as powerful, not as great as lithium, but it's, a Goldilocks tech. There are many, many such things like that. And I think we should start thinking 2 or 3 steps ahead about that sort of technology. Of course, the market and the superorganism will continue forward and do all kinds of fancy dopamine creating expensive splashes of technology. But we need to, at the same time, simultaneously be building out these alternative technologies and using them and scaling them in communities around the world. Globally, we also need to change our culture towards more of a regenerative society. And that means right now we are not only the regeneration that hits the earth, the net primary productivity all over the earth, how much plants grow every year, we're taking 40% of that and adding it to the human's system, leaving 60% for the other 10 million species. But in addition to that, we're taking millions of years of stored productivity and adding it to the system. This is patently unsustainable. And for instance, we need to have global cooling. Shown on the left is whale poop. Whale poop acts as a carbon sink in the ocean because the phytoplankton bloom and then drop to the bottom and they sequester carbon. Shown here is biochar, a new farming technology that absorbs carbon into the soil. So we need a whole new culture shift in the way that we think about our economic system. And I would offer, especially to the young people watching this, that we have arrived at a species level conversation where we know GDP is ultimately self-terminating, either ecologically or with war on our current path. So I offer perhaps we could aspire to a life ethic. And I'll briefly read the components of that. Life existing is preferable to no life existing. More kinds of life existing is preferable to fewer. Vibrant, complex ecosystems are preferable to small, fragmented, brittle ecosystems. Ecosystems with large, complex life are preferable to ecosystems with only microscopic life. Ecosystems supporting conscious minds, which are the virtual worlds of human minds and gorillas and dolphins, etc., are preferable to ecosystems without them. It is preferable to maximize existence, happiness, love, and understanding, and to minimize the suffering of minds in the universe. The future, both near and far, is real in the same sense that now is real, and via causality is determined by what is done now. Things which are preferable by this definition may be considered good. Things which are less preferable may be considered evil. We should maximize good and minimize evil, since the universe does not. So it's one of my wishes is to educate and inspire humans to culturally extend, not narrow, our circle of care. This is happening around the world with ecosystem restoration, and there is a lot of humans that are trying to step towards a regenerative culture. Okay, that's at the top scale. What about civil society? We need better education. Shown here is a civilian land corps of young people learning ecological skills and how to sequester carbon and grow food and other things. We are headed for a simplification. We see this road closed sign ahead. Many of us feel it. I call it the walking worried. And yet there's still all this entertainment and smorgasbord and Amazon brown truck deliveries and cool vacation junkets and hockey games and all this stuff in the meantime, so we get distracted. But if you look 2 or 3 steps ahead, all this information, especially if you understand human behavior, you know that en masse as a culture, we're not going to voluntarily tighten our belt, which means we will eventually hit a wall. What can we do to simplify ahead of that time? By simplify, I mean reduce complexity, reduce energy consumption. And any individual, any town, any country that voluntarily reduces complexity first will be outcompeted by other individuals, towns, and nations, which is something called a multipolar trap. But some nations or towns will be forced to do this because maybe there's a natural gas pipeline is shut off to Germany, etc. So there is a short-term cost to simplifying, but a long-term gain because those people, towns, universities, nations that do this first, while everything holds together, are going to develop new models and new ways of doing things that those that are still the rabbit running around at the high consumption level won't have time to do it once things change. Supply chains, again, showing this Byzantine structured Rube Goldberg machine, which is the global supply chain. As things become more sensitive and fragile in the global system, and as energy becomes more expensive, and as credit becomes less available, the world is going to become a larger place again. So localizing, onshoring, nearshoring, regionalizing supply chains, especially for basic goods and important things, is going to be important. Shown here is the red circle. I think Toronto is within that circle. I'm not even sure. And, that would be the real core stuff. And then the blue circle is, your trade with other areas. But those areas are much easier to get to than China or India or South Korea, et cetera. A shadow council. One of my favorite movies was Contact with Jodie Foster, and they built a machine that would travel to outer space, but there was a religious fundamentalist that sabotaged the machine, and we thought the movie was over. But lo and behold, they had another machine that they built, not telling anyone, in Hokkaido, Japan, and Jodie Foster, spoiler alert, ended up traveling to another dimension. In the same way, our city councils and the high status humans at universities as well will be resistant to the information in this presentation for many very valid reasons. So, to construct a shadow council, which ostensibly doesn't have the power and the authority as the regular city council, but they can be talking about these things and learning and building social capital and creating ideas ahead of time. It's something that's working off to the side that's unofficial, but is still working towards a great simplification. I can't speak to Canada, but the United States is really bifurcated. We have echo chambers, many of them. Here's a list of mimetic tribes from left to right politically. There are many different social groups that really don't talk to each other, and we're going to need diplomats that can suppress their own political agendas and the things that they care about in order to host discussions with wider groups of humans, because without that, we're really in trouble. So we need to have diplomacy and facilitation with people that don't agree with us. Transmutation, a word from King Midas, who everything he touched turned to gold. Everything we've been doing is transmuting the natural world over time into money over time. So while we can change monetary markers into real capital is natural capital, which is our forests and our healthy soil and our rivers. Social capital is our friends, our relationships. Here's two of my dogs. That dog shown there, Maisie, is going to be 14 in September, by the way. This is my house, built capital. There's solar panels and chainsaws and an aloe vera plant, and human capital, which is our health and our knowledge and our skills. These are real capital, and we should use our monetary markers to turn into more of these things. Healing. We have most of our population has experienced trauma. Some of you are probably experiencing trauma watching this presentation. We are increasingly an unhealthy society. And in order to address some of the challenges I'm presenting today, I suggest we need in every community across Canada and in the United States and in the world, libraries, but we also need libraries of healing where we have mental health buttressing and meditation and exercise and healthy food and dance and community events and social interactions. I spent 6 weeks in India earlier this year, and I was surrounded with 30 people for 6 weeks, and we chanted and sang every morning and did calisthenics, and then we had lectures. And we've become so rich as a culture on average that we just live in our own little castles and order stuff online, and we don't need people anymore. But in the near future, we're going to need people again, and we're going to need to have healing of people. And I think mental health, as we approach the great simplification, is going to be a huge issue. And there are many people who are qualified who are watching this show, this presentation right now in Canada that have abilities to make this happen. A life brigade. Again, this is my appeal to an animist respect of nature. We need a cultural change, some of us, to say, no, the superorganism is not allowed in this corner of Canada, in this part of my community in Saskatchewan or in Ontario. This part is sacred, and the economic superorganism is not allowed here. This is not a economic statistical argument. This is an argument from the heart that we treat these things as sacred. And as this entire economic system has increased, and now including artificial intelligence, are we in service of power or of life is a central question for the coming decades. Okay, moving to the academy. And again, I have a PhD, but I'm not affiliated with the university now. I used to teach at the University of Minnesota. These are just some suggestions of the importance that the universities around the world and in Canada can play towards this story. First of all, is we need to realize the context of our lives. So again, the global human economy is 1,000 times bigger than it was 5 centuries ago. Most of the science about humans and about human societies, especially social science, was developed during this very anomalous period. I think the academy needs to understand the carbon pulse and the moment that we're at because it informs all of our futures. And so this should be a driving backdrop for all people at universities is to understand some part of the system story. So instead of silos, academic silos, we really need to integrate the disciplines at universities around the world and have people horizontally doing horizontal and vertical research and sharing and integrating because it's the system science integration that matters. The time of reductionist expertise is over. We still need that, but only as part of a larger narrative. What does education look like? What are the things that we need to be teaching young people as we approach the nadir of the carbon pulse? What are some of the things we teach at universities that are really trivia and facts and figures that are no longer relevant to the future? What are the things that are going to matter to the young humans that will live during the 21st century? I think it's an incredible opportunity for the privileged, academic, curious people who are professors to apply whatever their knowledge is with a passion and intensity that matches the scale and stakes of our time. And so, still be scientists, be the best scientists you can be, but also be warriors at the same time because you have a contribution to make. Maybe it's developing an alternative to PFAS chemistry in our products, or maybe it's a new collective governance system, or maybe it's a regenerative agricultural technology. I mean, there's vast contributions that the academy can make, but we need to wake up and really rise to the occasion because the academy has more degrees of freedom than a lot of areas of our culture. I suggest that for those professors that are approaching retirement, that in the last few years before they retire, they do a pro-social capstone that is relevant to this biophysical story of humans in our future. That is a contribution to the future of humanity, given their domain and their expertise. And lastly, I suggest that many social contracts have occurred in the past. This is 20,000 years ago, the Cave of the Hands in Lascaux. But in my experience, the vibrance and curiosity and revolutionary spirit often happens in cities that have universities. And it's at a university that the mitochondria of something to replace the superorganism may be born. And as stewards and chaperones of these young humans, I think you, as professors, can breathe life into this new mitochondria. Last but not least, you are professors, you are citizens, but you're also humans. And I'm going to finish with some recommendations of how to take this all on board in your own life. First category is being. How do you be during this time? First of all, it is totally normal to grieve of the future that we thought existed, but now you're starting to understand that a different future lies ahead. And if you're sad about this, it's totally normal. What's not normal is you're dismissive or laughed about this or felt indifferent. To grieve is appropriate to what we face. So give yourself some time to reflect on this. And by the way, don't believe me in what I'm saying this. Research for yourself and come to your own conclusions. But even if you think I have a 10% chance of being right in what I've said today, I hope you will integrate some of these ideas into your work. Remember to keep perspective. If we're alive at the top of the carbon pulse, that seems like a really scary thing. But what about the Inuits in Nunavut or the Yukon or up in the north of Canada? If you told them, if you told a human, I'm going to set you out on a minus 50 degrees Celsius ice flow, you would think that's a death sentence. But to the people living up there, it's just another normal day. So we have to keep perspective of how much amazing opportunity we have. We have access to all the information ever acquired by our species for free at our fingertips, to give one example. Don't forget to live. I forget this a lot because this is stressful, toxic stuff that I've chosen as my job to teach. But we have to live and love and play music and dance and play with baby ducks and go on hikes and take naps and all the things that humans do. And not forget to have gratitude every day for all the amazing things in this time that we have, these perilous risks, but there's a lot to be grateful for, and I'm grateful for a lot in my life. We have to remember that this is a marathon and not a sprint, and to nourish our own bodies and souls and minds with healthy food, with exercise, with timeouts. We have to heal our amygdala and our fight or flight response of our reptilian system, and pause and reflect and be healthy. I think in addition to Goldilocks tech, inner tech is going to be a necessity, something I will benefit from myself. I need to walk the talk before I really advise this, but we are faced with a smorgasbord of different advice and opportunities and dopamine and consumption and travel. But really, our culture has shortened and shortened our attention spans, and dopamine has become a predominant neurotransmitter in our behaviors. And especially young people, they increasingly have lower attention spans. They can't read a book. They can only watch short TikTok videos. And my advice, especially to the young humans watching this, is to avoid the shallows and make sure to have dates where you set technology aside, dates and windows and times, because your brain is your most important asset going forward. And you want to have the attention span to be able to plant gardens and read a book and do longer term projects. So the real asset allocation shift isn't necessarily from money into real capital. It's also from our focus on dopamine into a more healthy portfolio of neurotransmitters like serotonin, endorphins, and oxytocin. Doing. What do we do with all this information? Well, you simplify first and beat the rush. Most of the best things in life are free after basic needs are met. And to simplify, if you really understand that society is not going to do these things ahead of time, that gives you an interesting impulse on the back end, because it empowers you to do things now because you know that society probably won't, and to simplify your own life, and don't be reliant on a large house that's going to be a lot of money to heat or cool, or a boyfriend in Holland, or well, if you really want a boyfriend in Holland, I'm not going to gainsay you. But my point is that energy and money are going to become more expensive in the not too distant future. Learn skills. You can imagine what skills are going to be needed in coming decades. And a lot of us are neglecting physical skills because our culture is so rich that we can outsource the skills to someone else. Ask yourself, if half of what I'm saying comes to pass, what is a skill that you could contribute to in your own community that you're kind of good at and are interested in? Avoid the consensus trance. We are such social creatures that we look to others to confirm what's true. And as academics, you're probably not as prone to this, but avoid groupthink and what other people think you should do, and think what is our reality, and come to your own conclusions. Intermittence. Humans don't need baseload energy. We are baseload energy. So we get massive energy benefits from the first few of the 100 watt light bulbs we have invisibly behind us. The first few have sufficiency, and then there's enough, and then there's plenty. And our current cultural goal is more and more and more stuff. So we have to remember that we don't have a true resource scarcity, but rather a longage of expectations. Carrying dissonance. Uncertainty is physically uncomfortable for humans, which is why people tend to gravitate towards really polarized positions, because then they don't have to devote any mental energy towards other what ifs. So the natural response to a presentation like this, if you haven't studied it, is, oh my gosh, technology will solve it. This is too Malthusian. We'll figure something out. There's no problem. Or, oh my God, we're screwed. It's Mad Max. But the reality is going to be in the middle. And we have to become more comfortable with uncertainty and navigate the pathways between fantasy and doom. Find the others. This is a scene from Lord of the Rings, and one of the reasons that I love the book and many people love the book is the fellowship. The fact that these 9, they're not even people, there were hobbits and men and dwarves, and they got together and shared an experience. We need to do the same thing. We are on a runaway train where the market and the superorganism is shoveling fuel into the engine car. So we need to meet with others in the dining car and have conversations about what matters and work on things that we're passionate about and just enjoy life with people and find the others that are on the same moral, intellectual, educational pathway that you are. Sharpen the sword. We have the agenda of the gene as biological organisms. We are a product of what worked in the past. We're walking forward, but our eyes are looking backward. But we don't have to follow the agenda of the gene. It is not our friend. So sharpening the sword is improving yourself towards a direction that you care about and you're capable of. And sharpen the sword because the sword is you. We are an intense comparing social species. We compare ourselves to others. I talked about Tiger Woods and his wife's new boyfriend, but we do this all the time. We flex and do other things just to raise our status. But we have to keep in mind that on an absolute basis, the average person in North America is richer materially than kings and queens of old from an energy and material standpoint. And yet, a lot of us feel like we're failing because we're comparing ourselves to the advertisements on television. So consider the absolute wealth that you have and the access to things that you have instead of comparing yourself all the time to others. Lastly, being, doing, and we. We need to expand the definition of self to be commensurate with our times. So one pro-social thing we can do is there is a autocorrelation with negative sentiments and negative emotions and anger and distrust. One person smiling and changing the behavior can break the chain of this. So don't be afraid to be kind and smile at strangers and do unexpected behaviors of grace, because you never know what sort of chain you're going to disrupt and start a new chain in a new direction. We don't know what's going to happen in the future. I think this presentation might have put some new walls on the probability distribution of what's possible. But one suggestion I have is to wend your way towards something that you're passionate about and care about. This is my good friend and colleague, DJ White, who ended up being the co-founder of Greenpeace International, and he ran Earth Trust. This is when he was 22. He was a geologist living in Indiana, and he didn't really know much about the world, except he loved dolphins and whales. But he determined there were no dolphins and whales in Indiana, and he bought a one-way ticket to Hawaii and volunteered cleaning dolphin poop out of aquariums. And within 15 years, he was the single most effective environmental activist of our time. He stopped the drift nets in the oceans. He did the flipper dolphin-safe tuna at Starkist. He stopped a dolphin drive kill in Taiwan, and many other success stories, just because he took a step in a direction without a plan of something he was passionate about. So I recommend that you wend yourself towards something that you feel passionate about with a purpose. Towards that end, give yourself a 24-hour vacation from other people and technology in a place you personally find meaningful, and ask yourself, who do I wish to be in this life? Why do I wish that? And how might that may be made real? And the answers are for you alone, but you might be glad to have them. Intrinsic. We often get validation externally for our behaviors and our self-worth. But given the stakes of everything I've described today, we have to follow our own moral compass of what feels right and what feels wrong and what feels rewarding and meaningful, and follow a true north moral compass according to you, not according to other people, and be intrinsically motivated. Do something for the benefit of someone else that nobody else, including the person or animal or forest, will ever know. Examine closely the complex feelings this causes to arise within you as a first step in sorting social motivation from personal altruism, especially for the younger people. Rocks in the river, metaphorically, as the water starts rushing in our economic systems, many people who are not grounded are going to metaphorically tumble downstream. And if you have resources and you are psychologically sound and have a pro-social outlook, try to ground yourself as a large rock in the river of your community that other people can rely on. And if enough people do this, we can actually not only help our community and our university, but we can redirect the flow of the water. Maximize your impact. Once we hear about climate change and all the negative things going on in the biosphere, there's a tendency to try to be perfect and not eat meat and drive electric cars and not travel and recycle. And the list gets endless. And I think that all those things are good personal hygiene at these times. But I would much rather you, especially as universities in a wealthy country of Canada, to take this opportunity to maximize your impact on the planet, as opposed to just being 1/8 billionth of a slightly smaller part of a problem. So this is the list of advice I have for you. I'll close with this quote from Ilya Prigogine, an ecological economist. When a system is far from equilibrium, small islands of coherence can shift the entire system. Maybe some of those islands of coherence could be universities in Canada as a mitochondria of a new cultural social system. Thank you all. So, Kira, you had no idea what I was going to say. You know my work. I hope this wasn't too much for your colleagues in Canada. This is the longest talk I've ever given, but I do think it's important to see the bird's eye picture. And we've got some time for some questions if you have any.
I have tons of questions, but I want to respect your time as well. Um, One of the things that really jumped out on me in this talk and some more recent talks I've heard you give is around this idea of libraries of care. And why this is really salient, I think when I'm educating in this space, one of the hardest questions that I hear from students is, what's the point? And that breaks my heart in a million different directions. What's the point from the sense of like an apathy or a system overload where they're witnessing the foreclosure of nature. They're seeing the horsemen come in. They are watching war, live streaming war on their phones, and they say, what's the point? Or I can't do anything. Or on the flip side, they'll say something like, what's the point? Technology will save us. And that is baked into this, very short-sighted dopamine reward system that they're working within. When you brought up the idea of libraries of care, I immediately thought, well, the institution is this incredible library. We have many libraries on campus, but how can we nurture a different kind of library? And what would that look like for healing and building capacity and resilience that would really support the young people who will be alive much longer than we will, who will be inheriting the mess we're giving them?
I think you kind of answered your own question. I mean, we need people organically to step up and say, this is what our young humans need as part of a university of experience. There needs to be a feeling of community that goes beyond competition for grades and getting a resume, but actually involves meditation and cooking and singing and outdoor group activities. And I think the antidote to apathy is finding other people in a community because, as I mentioned, I deal with this toxic stuff a lot. And the thing that supports me and leads me away from apathy is the dozens and now hundreds and growing to be more than that people that have my back that I talk to about this and feel as passionate about it as I do, and we're sharing ideas and working on projects and we're rolling up our sleeves. And doing it alone feels like what's the point? But doing it in a small group, as Margaret Mead said, it's small groups of humans are the only thing that can change the planet, or something she said. I forgot the exact words. Um, but I think we need to heal our reptilian and emotional systems as a precursor to the intellectual thing, because our cognitive brain that perceives facts and studies for tests sits atop a much larger pyramid of things going on that in our modern age, we're not that healthy or regulated. We're constantly in a fight or flight mode, and our amygdalas are activated. And so universities need to, I think, and communities have to have places to go that aren't scarlet letter stigma for people that have, oh, they went to the mental health clinic. It's not like that. It's actually, this is where I go to be human. It should be promoted, and I want to go there and be with these other humans because we're talking about all this stuff and we're doing cool things and activities and we exercise and good food. And I don't know the university structure the way it is now, how to go from here to there, but something like that is sorely needed.
Another thing that comes to mind is how can we widen our boundaries for imaginaries and possibilities? We're working in these silos, literally the climate control, everything is within these boxes. Do you have any ideas as an educator, as a communicator? Do you think getting people outside, maybe outdoors, is there anything you can think of that might be helpful there?
Well, first of all, ask what would nature do. Spend as much time in nature as you can. It calms your nervous system. It grounds you. And living in Canada, you have plenty of access to that some people in the world don't. I think we need tangible examples. We need more examples and pilots of people doing cool, interesting things. There's research shown that if someone sees another person doing an act of altruism, they're 300% more likely to do an altruistic thing themselves. So I think the problem with many of these lectures and these concepts is they're all a bunch of scary facts and then another to-do list of what to do in your own life without tangible examples. But the people listening to this, we need to start doing those tangible examples and promoting them and showing that life doesn't have to be a disaster if we're using less energy and less stuff. And so I think just start by doing more things with other people in the direction of a simplification.
Very cool. And a question for Nate Hagans as a human, not a communicator and an educator. But I always like to ask you, what are the coolest birds you've seen lately? And also, what is growing in your garden right now?
Well, I see a lot of birds. And as you know, I think I told you I have the Merlin Cornell thing on my phone that identifies them. And yesterday and the day before, I identified a black-billed cuckoo, which you can look it up. I've never seen one, but I hear it now 2 days in a row, and I'm trying to see it. And I looked it up online, and sure enough, that is the sound that I'm hearing. I see pileated woodpeckers every day. I will give you an honest answer about my garden. My girlfriend is growing a lot of things, garlic and tomatoes and onions and spinach and kale. I'm responsible for potatoes, and the potato patch looks like the Tasmanian devil went through there because I've been so freaking busy that the weeds are larger than the potato plants. So I will be frequenting my farmer's market this fall. Um, but it is a failing of mine that I've been working too much this spring, because not only is the produce itself yummy and rewarding in the fall, but it's the act of being out in the soil with my birds, my chickens and ducks and guinea fowl and dogs. So my garden is not as it should be this year, Kira, but I endeavor to change that in the future.
Through a great simplification.
Well, it's a challenge, right? Because I know this is coming, and I'm trying to affect it with our work of our channel and our communication. And in doing that, I've complexified my own life at the same time that I know a simplification is coming, and I'm sure many people can relate to that. But I have grown a wonderful garden in past years, so I at least have the skills, and I can still cook the stuff. But to be totally blunt and honest, we were just talking about this last week. Red Wing, Minnesota, where I live, has a huge farmers market, and in September, in between traveling, I'm going to go there and support the local CSAs and put away our V8 and our tomato sauce and our pumpkins and squash in the root cellar and things like that.
Amazing. Nate, it has been a honor, a pleasure, and I am super grateful for your time. On behalf of the Environmental Studies Association of Canada and our partners, thank you very much. Nothing but amazing things to say about your work. Thank you also to the people behind the scenes, to Leslie, to Luke, and to Misty, everyone who's contributed today. Deep thanks from Canada. We are very grateful.
Good day, my friend.
Merci beaucoup.